My name is Zara and I am 28 years old. Last Thanksgiving, my parents kicked me out of their house and told me to go live in the streets because I refused to give my trust fund inheritance to my golden child brother Marcus. What they did not know was that I had already built a $25 million tech empire in complete secrecy. The family dinner that was supposed to celebrate gratitude became the moment that shattered everything I believed about blood loyalty and set into motion a chain of events that would expose decades of manipulation and favoritism. Before we dive into this family drama that changed everything, tell me in the comments where you are watching from. If this story hits different, smash that like button and subscribe because what happens next will blow your mind. The revenge I served was colder than the turkey they threw away that night. The tension had been building for months before that fateful Thanksgiving dinner. Marcus, my 25-year-old brother, had been pressuring our parents to convince me to hand over my trust fund inheritance that I was set to receive on my 30th birthday. The fund established by our late grandmother was worth approximately $800,000, and according to the legal documents, it was specifically designated for me as the eldest grandchild. Marcus had always been the favorite. While I spent my childhood excelling academically, earning scholarships and working part-time jobs to pay for my own expenses, he coasted through life expecting everything to be handed to him. Our parents funded his failed business ventures, paid his credit card debts, and even bought him a house when he turned 23. Meanwhile, I had been living independently since college, building my tech startup from my tiny studio apartment. The morning of Thanksgiving, I arrived at my childhood home carrying homemade cranberry sauce and a bottle of expensive wine, hoping for a peaceful family gathering. The moment I walked through the front door, I could sense something was wrong. My mother, Patricia, barely acknowledged my greeting, and my father, Robert, was pacing nervously in the living room. Marcus sat smugly on the couch, scrolling through his phone with an expression I had learned to recognize as trouble. During dinner preparation, the conversation turned to finances. Marcus began complaining about his mounting debts, his failed cryptocurrency investments, and how unfair it was that I would inherit grandmother's money when he needed it more. He claimed that since he was planning to get married to his girlfriend Rebecca, he deserved the inheritance to fund their wedding and down payment on a bigger house. My parents nodded sympathetically, as they always did when Marcus presented his sob stories. Then my father cleared his throat and delivered what felt like a rehearsed speech about family loyalty and helping those in need. He suggested that I should consider transferring my inheritance to Marcus since I appeared to be doing well financially and did not seem to need the money as desperately as my brother did. I was stunned by their assumption that I was financially stable. Yes, I had been living independently and seemed self-sufficient, but they had no idea about the true extent of my success. For the past 6 years, I had been secretly building Cloud Vault Technologies, a data security company that had grown from a one-person operation in my apartment to a multinational corporation with offices in 12 countries. We had just completed our latest funding round, valuing the company at over $150 million, and my personal net worth had reached $25 million. I had kept my business success completely private from my family for several reasons. First, I wanted to prove to myself that I could succeed without their support or interference. Second, I had witnessed how money changed people's behavior, and I wanted to maintain authentic relationships based on genuine love rather than financial interest. Third, I had learned early in life that my achievements often made my parents uncomfortable as they highlighted Marcus's lack of ambition and success. When I politely declined to give up my inheritance, explaining that the money was specifically left to me by grandmother for a reason, the atmosphere in the room shifted dramatically. Marcus exploded into a rage, accusing me of being selfish and ungrateful. He claimed that I had always been jealous of him, and that this was my way of asserting superiority over the family. My parents joined his attack with my mother, saying that I had always been difficult and stubborn, and that my refusal to help my brother proved I had no family loyalty. My father accused me of being greedy and suggested that my grandmother would be ashamed of my selfishness if she were still alive. The argument escalated quickly. Marcus stood up from the dinner table, pointing his finger at me while shouting about how I thought I was better than everyone else. He demanded that I sign over the inheritance immediately, or face the consequences. When I asked what consequences he was threatening, my parents exchanged a look that I had never seen before. My father delivered the ultimatum that would change everything. If I refused to help Marcus, I was no longer welcome in their home. My mother added that perhaps I should go live in the streets, since I apparently did not value family relationships. They gave me exactly 10 minutes to gather my belongings and leave their house permanently. As I sat there processing their words, I realized that this was not a spontaneous outburst born from holiday stress. This was a calculated plan that they had discussed and agreed upon beforehand. The timing, the coordinated responses, and the specific ultimatum all pointed to a premeditated attempt to manipulate me into surrendering my inheritance. In that moment, I understood that my relationship with my family had been built on conditional love and financial expectations rather than genuine care and respect. The people who were supposed to support me unconditionally had just chosen money over their own daughter. The realization was both heartbreaking and liberating. I calmly stood up from the dinner table, looked each of them in the eye, and said that I would respect their wishes. I gathered my purse and coat, walked out of their house, and drove away without looking back. As I sat in my car in their driveway, I made a decision that would set the wheels of justice in motion. They wanted to play games with money and family loyalty. They had no idea what they had just unleashed. The drive home from my parents' house felt surreal. The streets were quiet on Thanksgiving evening, and I found myself processing the magnitude of what had just occurred. My family had essentially disowned me over money they assumed I needed, while I was secretly worth more than all of them combined. The irony was almost laughable, but the pain was very real. Back in my downtown penthouse apartment, I poured myself a glass of wine and sat by the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. The view that usually brought me peace now felt different. Everything I had worked to build, every success I had achieved, suddenly felt hollow without a family to share it with. But as the initial shock wore off, a different emotion began to emerge: cold, calculating clarity. I had spent years protecting my family's feelings by hiding my success, allowing them to maintain their narrative that Marcus was the golden child, while I struggled as the difficult, independent daughter. I had funded my own education, built my own career, and achieved extraordinary success, all while they funneled their resources into my brother's endless failures. They had taken my strength for granted and mistaken my independence for selfishness. The next morning, I began conducting research into my family's financial situation. As the CEO of a data security company, I had access to sophisticated investigative tools and databases that most people could never imagine. What I discovered over the following weeks painted a picture that was far worse than I had suspected. Marcus was not just struggling financially, he was drowning in debt. His cryptocurrency investments had lost over $200,000 of my parents' money. His credit cards were maxed out to the tune of $75,000. His mortgage was 3 months behind, and the bank had already initiated foreclosure proceedings. His girlfriend Rebecca had no idea about the extent of his financial problems, and he had been lying to her about his job status. He had been unemployed for 8 months, but had been pretending to go to work every day. My parents' financial situation was equally troubling. They had refinanced their house multiple times to fund Marcus's ventures, and were now carrying over $400,000 in mortgage debt on a property worth $350,000. They had depleted their retirement savings and were relying solely on my father's pension and my mother's part-time income. They were facing their own financial crisis, but had been too proud to admit it to anyone outside the family. The inheritance they wanted me to surrender represented their last hope of avoiding bankruptcy. They had calculated that $800,000 would be enough to pay off Marcus's debts, catch up on their mortgage payments, and provide a small buffer for emergencies. They had gambled everything on their assumption that I would choose family loyalty over personal financial security. As I dug deeper into public records and financial databases, I uncovered something even more disturbing. My parents had been intercepting mail addressed to me at their house for over 2 years. Among the intercepted correspondence were several official documents related to my inheritance, including notices about early access options and investment opportunities that could have significantly increased the fund's value. They had deliberately kept this information from me to maintain control over the timeline and circumstances of the inheritance distribution. The betrayal cut deeper than their Thanksgiving ultimatum. They had not only demanded my money but had actively sabotaged my financial interests by withholding important information. This was not just family drama. This was financial fraud and mail theft, both of which carried serious legal consequences. I realized that my approach to this situation needed to be strategic rather than emotional. Simply revealing my wealth and making them feel foolish would provide temporary satisfaction, but it would not address the underlying patterns of manipulation and favoritism that had defined our family dynamics for decades. I needed a plan that would expose their hypocrisy, protect my interests, and ensure that justice was served in a way that would have lasting consequences. My first step was to secure my inheritance completely. I contacted the trust administrator and discovered that my parents had already attempted to file paperwork, claiming that I was mentally incapacitated and unable to manage the inheritance responsibly. They had been working with a lawyer to have themselves appointed as trustees with the authority to distribute the funds according to what they deemed appropriate. The administrator had rejected their petition due to lack of evidence, but their attempt revealed the calculated nature of their scheme. I immediately filed counter-documentation, establishing my mental competency and requesting expedited distribution of the inheritance to prevent any future interference. I also hired a forensic accountant to investigate all financial transactions involving my family to build a comprehensive record of their financial mismanagement and fraudulent activities. My second step was to gather evidence of their betrayal. I installed discreet recording equipment in my car and obtained legal advice about recording laws in our state. I planned to document any future conversations that might reveal additional details about their scheme or provide evidence of their illegal activities. My third step was to build a network of allies who could support my position and provide independent verification of my claims. I reached out to extended family members, family friends, and professional contacts who had witnessed the patterns of favoritism and manipulation over the years. I was careful to present myself as someone seeking understanding rather than revenge, but I wanted to ensure that I had credible witnesses who could corroborate my experiences. The most challenging part of my strategy was managing my own emotions. Despite their betrayal, these were still my parents and my brother. I had grown up loving them even as I recognized their flaws and unfair treatment. The decision to pursue justice rather than reconciliation was not easy, but I knew that allowing their behavior to continue unchecked would only enable further manipulation and potential harm to others. As I developed my plan, I began to see the situation from a different perspective. This was not just about my personal grievances or my family's financial problems. This was about accountability, consequences, and the importance of treating people with respect regardless of their perceived financial status. My parents and Marcus had revealed their true characters when they thought I was vulnerable and dependent on their approval. They had made their choice when they decided that money was more important than their relationship with me. Now it was time for them to face the consequences of that choice. The game had changed, and they had no idea what was coming. The week following Thanksgiving marked the beginning of what I privately called Operation Truth Reveal. I had spent years building a successful business by being strategic, patient, and thorough in my planning. Now I would apply those same skills to dismantling the web of lies and manipulation that had defined my family relationships for decades. My first major breakthrough came when I contacted my grandmother's former lawyer, Martin Richardson, who had drafted the original trust documents. Richardson had retired, but he agreed to meet with me after I explained my concerns about potential interference with the inheritance. During our meeting, he revealed information that shocked even me. My grandmother had specifically designed the trust to protect me from family pressure and manipulation. In her private notes, which Richardson shared with me, she had documented her concerns about my parents' favoritism toward Marcus and their tendency to prioritize his needs over mine. She had witnessed the patterns of financial enabling and had feared that any direct inheritance would eventually end up funding Marcus's lifestyle rather than supporting my future. Even more revealing, my grandmother had included provisions in the trust that would trigger additional investigations if anyone attempted to challenge my competency or claim undue influence. She had anticipated exactly the type of manipulation my parents had attempted and had built legal safeguards to prevent it. Richardson explained that my parents' petition for trusteeship had actually triggered an automatic audit of their financial relationship with Marcus, and the results were damning. The audit revealed that over the past 5 years, my parents had given Marcus over $300,000 in direct cash transfers, loan guarantees, and debt payments. They had also co-signed multiple credit cards and loans that Marcus had defaulted on, leaving them liable for his debts. The financial trail painted a picture of systematic financial abuse where my parents had consistently prioritized Marcus's immediate wants over their own long-term financial security. Armed with this information, I began reaching out to other family members who had witnessed the dysfunction but had remained silent to avoid conflict. My Aunt Sarah, my father's sister, had been particularly vocal about her concerns regarding Marcus's behavior over the years. When I shared the basic facts about the Thanksgiving incident without revealing my financial situation, she immediately offered her support and shared additional observations that corroborated my experiences. Sarah revealed that Marcus had approached her multiple times asking for money, claiming that our parents were being unreasonable about his financial needs. He had told her that I was selfish and vindictive, and that the family inheritance should be redistributed more fairly. He had even suggested that she should speak to me about giving up my inheritance for the good of the family. Sarah had refused to get involved, but she had been documenting these conversations because she found them inappropriate and concerning. My cousin Jennifer, Sarah's daughter, provided even more valuable insights. She worked in banking and had professional experience with financial fraud cases. When I described my parents' attempts to claim trusteeship and their interception of my mail, she immediately recognized the legal implications and offered to help me document everything properly. Jennifer explained that mail theft was a federal crime, and that attempting to fraudulently claim trusteeship could result in serious legal consequences for my parents. As I built my network of allies, I also began documenting the emotional and psychological impact of my family's behavior. I started seeing a therapist, Dr. Amanda Chen, who specialized in family trauma and financial abuse. Dr. Chen helped me understand that my family's treatment of me fit classic patterns of scapegoating and financial manipulation that were common in dysfunctional family systems. Through therapy, I gained clarity about the long-term effects of my family's behavior on my self-esteem and relationships. I realized that I had spent years overachieving and building financial success partly as a way to prove my worth to people who would never acknowledge my accomplishments. Dr. Chen helped me understand that my decision to keep my business success secret had been a healthy protective mechanism, not a character flaw. Meanwhile, I continued monitoring my family's activities through discreet channels. My former neighbor, Mrs. Rodriguez, who had maintained a friendship with my mother, began sharing concerning information about the ongoing family dynamics. According to Mrs. Rodriguez, my mother had been telling neighbors that I had had a mental breakdown and was being stubborn and irrational about family financial matters. She was portraying herself and my father as victims of my selfishness and claiming that my behavior was causing Marcus significant emotional distress. Even more troubling, Mrs. Rodriguez reported that Marcus had been driving by my apartment building multiple times per week, apparently conducting surveillance on my activities. He had been asking mutual acquaintances about my job, my income, and my living situation, trying to gather information that might support their narrative that I was being unreasonable about the inheritance. This revelation prompted me to enhance my personal security measures. I hired a private investigator, David Park, who specialized in corporate security and personal protection. Park conducted a comprehensive assessment of my safety and discovered that Marcus had indeed been engaging in systematic stalking behavior. He had been following me to work, photographing my car and apartment building, and even attempting to gain access to my office building by claiming to be a family member trying to surprise me. Park's investigation also revealed that Marcus had been researching my business online and had discovered the name of my company, though he apparently had not yet connected it to my personal wealth. However, his research activities suggested that he was actively trying to find leverage that could be used against me in future family negotiations. The stalking behavior crossed a legal line that I could not ignore. Park helped me file a restraining order against Marcus, documenting his surveillance activities and providing evidence of his harassment. The restraining order would serve multiple purposes. It would protect me from further harassment, create a legal record of his inappropriate behavior, and potentially trigger additional investigations into his activities. As I prepared for the next phase of my plan, I received an unexpected phone call from Rebecca, Marcus's girlfriend. She had discovered some of the financial documents that Marcus had been hiding and had questions about his claims regarding our family situation. During our conversation, it became clear that Marcus had been lying to her about virtually every aspect of his financial situation and his relationship with our family. Rebecca revealed that Marcus had told her our parents were wealthy and that they regularly provided financial support to both of their children. He had claimed that I was jealous of their generosity toward him and that I was trying to manipulate the family inheritance to punish him for being successful. He had also told her that my refusal to share the inheritance was causing our parents serious financial hardship, and that I was essentially holding the family hostage with my demands. When Rebecca discovered the foreclosure notices and credit card bills that Marcus had been hiding, she realized that nothing he had told her about our family was true. She was particularly upset to learn that their planned wedding was being funded by money that did not exist, and that Marcus had been lying about his employment status for months. Rebecca's willingness to share information provided me with crucial insights into Marcus's mindset and his ongoing deception. She agreed to keep our conversation confidential while she decided how to handle her relationship with Marcus, but she also provided me with copies of some financial documents that Marcus had forged, including fake employment letters and fraudulent income statements. The pieces of my case were falling into place. I had legal documentation of my parents' attempted fraud, evidence of Marcus's stalking and harassment, financial records proving their systematic deception, and witness testimony from multiple family members and associates. The foundation for justice had been built methodically and comprehensively. Now it was time to spring the trap that would expose the truth and deliver the consequences they had earned through their choices. The next phase would test everything I had learned about strategy, timing, and the power of information. They thought they were dealing with a powerless victim who would eventually cave to their pressure. They were about to discover just how wrong they had been. 2 months after the Thanksgiving ultimatum, I decided it was time to execute my plan. The timing was perfect, because Marcus had escalated his harassment campaign, and my parents had begun spreading false rumors about my mental health throughout our extended family and social circle. They had pushed too far, and now they would face the full consequences of their actions. My first move was to schedule a family meeting under the pretense of reconsidering their demands. I contacted my parents through my Aunt Zara, explaining that I had been reflecting on our relationship and wanted to discuss a possible resolution. I suggested we meet at a neutral location, a private dining room at an upscale restaurant downtown, to avoid the emotional triggers of meeting in their home. My parents were immediately eager to meet, assuming that months of isolation and pressure had finally broken my resistance. Marcus was practically gloating when Sarah relayed the news, telling her that he knew I would eventually come to my senses and do the right thing for the family. They had no idea that I had spent those months building an ironclad case against them and preparing for this exact moment. On the day of the meeting, I arrived early and set up discreet recording equipment with the help of my private investigator. Everything we discussed would be documented and could be used as evidence in future legal proceedings. I had also arranged for my lawyer, Patricia Williams, to be present via phone if needed, and my therapist, Dr. Chen, was on standby to provide professional documentation of the emotional abuse patterns if necessary. My parents and Marcus arrived exactly on time, dressed formally and carrying folders of what I assumed were legal documents. They had clearly prepared their own strategy for this meeting, and their confidence was evident in their body language. Marcus kept checking his phone and smiling smugly, while my parents exchanged satisfied glances as they settled into their seats. My father began the conversation by expressing how pleased they were that I had finally decided to prioritize family relationships over personal stubbornness. He delivered what sounded like a prepared speech about forgiveness, family loyalty, and the importance of supporting each other during difficult times. My mother nodded along occasionally, adding comments about how worried they had been about my emotional state and how relieved they were to see me being reasonable. Marcus then presented his proposal, which was even more outrageous than their original demands. Not only did he want my entire inheritance, but he also wanted me to co-sign a loan that would allow him to consolidate his existing debts and purchase a larger house for his upcoming wedding. He had calculated that my signature would be valuable because of my apparent financial stability, and he wanted to leverage my credit to secure better loan terms. As they outlined their demands, I maintained a calm, interested expression while internally marveling at their audacity. They were not only asking me to give up my inheritance, but also to take on legal responsibility for Marcus's financial obligations. They truly believed that I had no choice but to comply with their wishes because I needed their approval and acceptance. When they finished their presentation, I calmly reached into my briefcase and pulled out a thick folder of documents. I explained that I had indeed been reconsidering our relationship and had done extensive research into our family's financial situation. I told them that before I made any decisions about my inheritance, I wanted to share some information I had discovered. I began by presenting the forensic accounting report that detailed every financial transaction between my parents and Marcus over the past 5 years. The numbers were staggering: $315,000 in direct transfers, loan guarantees, and debt payments. I showed them documentation of Marcus's hidden unemployment, his fraudulent loan applications, and his mounting credit card debt that they had been secretly covering. The color drained from my parents' faces as they realized the scope of information I had gathered. Marcus tried to interrupt and deflect, claiming that I had invaded their privacy and that the financial arrangements between him and our parents were none of my business. But I calmly continued presenting evidence, including copies of the intercepted mail and documentation of their attempted trusteeship fraud. The atmosphere in the room shifted dramatically as they realized that I was not the vulnerable, desperate daughter they had expected to manipulate. I presented copies of the restraining order against Marcus, along with photographic evidence of his stalking behavior and harassment campaign. I showed them witness statements from family members and neighbors who had documented their attempts to spread false rumors about my mental health. My mother began crying and claiming that they had only been trying to help Marcus and preserve family unity. She insisted that everything they had done was motivated by love and concern, not malice or greed. My father became defensive and angry, accusing me of being vindictive and calculating in gathering evidence against my own family. Marcus exploded into the rage that I had expected and that my recording equipment captured perfectly. He accused me of being jealous, manipulative, and obsessed with proving my superiority over him. He claimed that I had always resented his success and had been plotting against him for years. The irony of his accusations was lost on him as he revealed the depth of his entitlement and narcissism. Then I delivered the revelation that changed everything. I calmly explained that I had been financially independent for years, and that my concerns about the inheritance had nothing to do with personal financial need. I told them that I was the founder and CEO of Cloud Vault Technologies, a company they had probably heard of in the news, and that my personal net worth was approximately $25 million. The silence that followed was deafening. Marcus's face went through a series of expressions as he processed the implications of my revelation. My parents stared at me in complete shock, unable to reconcile their image of me as their struggling dependent daughter with the reality of my extraordinary success. I continued explaining that I had kept my business success private, specifically to maintain authentic family relationships and avoid the complications that money often brings to family dynamics. I told them that their behavior over the past months had revealed their true priorities and had demonstrated that their love was conditional on their ability to control and manipulate me. Marcus was the first to recover from the shock, and his response was exactly what I had anticipated. Instead of shame or remorse, he became angry that I had hidden my wealth while allowing him to struggle financially. He accused me of being cruel and selfish for not helping him when I clearly had the resources to solve all his problems. He demanded to know why I had allowed our parents to sacrifice their retirement savings when I could have easily provided assistance. This reaction confirmed everything I had suspected about his character and provided perfect documentation of his sense of entitlement. Even when confronted with evidence of his own deception and manipulation, his primary concern was how my success could benefit him rather than how his behavior had affected our relationship. The meeting ended with me standing up and delivering my final statement. I explained that their choices had consequences, and that I would be pursuing all available legal remedies for their fraudulent activities and harassment. The 48 hours following our family meeting unleashed a cascade of consequences that exceeded even my strategic expectations. The truth had been revealed, and now I watched as the carefully constructed facade of my family's dysfunction crumbled under the weight of reality and legal accountability. Marcus was the first to crack under pressure. Within hours of our meeting, he called me 17 times, leaving increasingly desperate voicemails that ranged from furious accusations to pathetic pleas for financial assistance. He had clearly told Rebecca about my wealth because she also began calling, though her messages were more measured and apologetic. She wanted to discuss their relationship and his deception, and she was seeking advice about how to handle the financial mess he had created. My parents' response was more calculated but equally revealing. My mother sent a lengthy email attempting to reframe their behavior as misguided attempts to help Marcus rather than deliberate manipulation. She claimed that they had never intended to hurt me, and that they had only been trying to preserve family unity during a difficult time. She asked if we could meet privately to discuss how to move forward as a family, suggesting that my revelation about my wealth had changed everything, and that we could now work together to solve everyone's problems. My father's approach was more aggressive. He called my Aunt Zara and several other family members, attempting to control the narrative by claiming that I had been deceiving everyone about my financial situation and that my secrecy proved I was manipulative and untrustworthy. He suggested that my success was somehow illegitimate or that I had been hiding money to avoid family responsibilities. His attempts at damage control only served to further alienate extended family members who had already witnessed his pattern of favoritism and manipulation. The legal consequences began materializing quickly. The restraining order against Marcus was approved and served, legally prohibiting him from contacting me or coming within 500 feet of my residence or workplace. When he violated the order by showing up at my office building 2 days later, he was arrested and spent a night in jail before being released on bail with additional restrictions. The mail theft investigation, launched by the postal inspector, uncovered evidence of systematic interference with my correspondence over a 2-year period. Federal charges were filed against my parents for mail theft and obstruction, which carried potential prison sentences and significant financial penalties. They were forced to hire criminal defense attorneys, depleting more of their already strained financial resources. The attempted trusteeship fraud triggered additional investigations by the state attorney general's office. The forensic accountant's report provided evidence of financial elder abuse in their manipulation of my grandmother's trust intentions, and additional charges were filed related to fraudulent legal filings and attempted theft by deception. Rebecca made the decision to end her engagement with Marcus after discovering the full extent of his deception and financial irresponsibility. She moved out of their shared apartment and filed her own legal complaints related to his fraudulent representations about his income and employment status during their relationship. She had co-signed several loans based on his lies, and she was pursuing legal remedies to protect herself from his debts. The financial house of cards that my family had built began collapsing rapidly. Without the inheritance money they had counted on, my parents were unable to make their mortgage payments and officially entered foreclosure proceedings. Marcus's creditors began aggressive collection activities, and his car was repossessed when he defaulted on those payments as well. The social consequences were equally devastating. Word of the criminal charges and family drama spread quickly through their social circle, and my parents found themselves isolated from friends and neighbors who had previously supported them. The narrative they had tried to maintain about being victims of my selfishness was contradicted by the legal evidence and witness testimony that emerged during the investigations. Marcus's professional reputation was destroyed when his fake employment letters were discovered during the legal proceedings. Several companies where he had applied for jobs learned about his fraudulent applications, and he was blacklisted from employment in his field. His social media accounts, where he had been maintaining the facade of success and financial stability, became evidence of his systematic deception. My Aunt Sarah became a crucial ally in managing the family fallout. She had witnessed my parents' favoritism for years, but had remained silent to avoid conflict. Now she felt empowered to speak openly about the dysfunction she had observed, and she provided emotional support as I navigated the legal proceedings and family estrangement. Other extended family members began reaching out to share their own experiences with my parents' manipulation and Marcus's entitled behavior. My cousin Jennifer revealed that Marcus had approached her about investing in his business ventures, using false financial projections and claiming family endorsements that did not exist. My uncle David shared stories about family gatherings where my achievements were minimized, while Marcus's minor accomplishments were celebrated excessively. The pattern that emerged from these conversations was clear. My parents had been systematically manipulating family narratives for years, promoting Marcus as the successful golden child while undermining my accomplishments and independence. Extended family members had noticed the dysfunction, but had assumed it was normal sibling rivalry rather than calculated emotional abuse. As the legal proceedings progressed, my parents attempted to negotiate plea agreements that would minimize their criminal exposure. Their lawyers reached out to propose restitution payments and public apologies in exchange for reduced charges. However, the prosecutor's office was reluctant to offer significant concessions given the systematic nature of their fraud and the federal charges related to mail theft. Marcus's situation became increasingly desperate as his support systems collapsed. With Rebecca gone, his parents facing criminal charges, and his employment prospects destroyed, he had no remaining sources of financial assistance. He was forced to move back into his childhood bedroom, which was ironic given that his parents were facing foreclosure and would soon lose the house entirely. The stress of the legal proceedings and financial collapse began taking a physical toll on my parents' health. My mother developed anxiety-related health problems and required medication to manage panic attacks. My father's blood pressure spiked dangerously, and he was hospitalized briefly after experiencing chest pains that were later diagnosed as stress-related. Throughout this period, I maintained strict no contact with my immediate family while staying informed about developments through my lawyer and private investigator. The temptation to feel guilty about their suffering was strong, but my therapist, Dr. Chen, helped me understand that their current situation was the direct result of their own choices and actions, not my decision to seek justice. The most difficult aspect of this period was managing my own emotional response to their collapse. Despite everything they had done, these were still the people who had raised me, and watching their lives unravel was painful even when it was justified. I had to constantly remind myself that accountability was not cruelty, and that enabling their behavior would only perpetuate the cycle of manipulation and abuse. The foundation for my new life was being built on the ruins of their deception. 6 months after that pivotal family meeting, the legal proceedings reached their conclusion and the true scope of justice began to reveal itself. My parents ultimately accepted plea agreements that resulted in probation, community service, and significant financial restitution. Marcus faced additional charges related to his fraudulent loan applications and was sentenced to 18 months of supervised probation, along with mandatory financial counseling. The foreclosure on my parents' house was completed, and they were forced to move into a small rental apartment across town. The lifestyle they had maintained through debt and manipulation was no longer sustainable, and they had to confront the reality of living within their actual means for the first time in years. The adjustment was difficult, but it was also necessary for their long-term financial health. Marcus moved to another state to live with distant relatives, an attempt to rebuild his life away from the reputation he had created locally. Before leaving, he sent me a brief letter that contained what might have been the closest thing to an apology I would ever receive from him. He acknowledged that his behavior had been wrong, and that he had taken advantage of our parents' willingness to enable his financial irresponsibility. However, even his apology contained traces of his characteristic entitlement, as he suggested that my wealth had somehow contributed to the family problems by creating unrealistic expectations. The most surprising development came when my mother reached out through my Aunt Zara to request a private meeting. Against the advice of some of my supporters, I agreed to meet with her in Dr. Chen's office with my therapist present to facilitate the conversation. The meeting was emotionally intense but ultimately productive. My mother had used the months of separation and legal consequences to engage in her own therapy and self-reflection. She acknowledged the patterns of favoritism and manipulation that had characterized our family dynamics, and took responsibility for her role in enabling Marcus's destructive behavior. She admitted that her fear of losing Marcus's love and approval had blinded her to the damage being done to our relationship and to his own character development. More importantly, she expressed genuine pride in my achievements and remorse for the years she had spent minimizing my success and independence. She revealed that she had always felt intimidated by my capabilities and drive, and that her criticism had been rooted in her own insecurities rather than any real concerns about my character or choices. While the conversation provided some emotional closure, I made it clear that rebuilding our relationship would require consistent actions over time, rather than words alone. I established clear boundaries about future contact, and made it explicit that any relationship we might develop would be based on mutual respect and honesty, rather than obligation or guilt. The experience fundamentally changed my perspective on family and relationships. I had learned that blood relationships do not automatically create loyalty, love, or respect, and that these qualities must be earned and maintained through consistent behavior. I also realized that my instinct to keep my business success private had been correct, as it had allowed me to see my family's true character without the complications that wealth often brings to relationships. My chosen family became increasingly important during this period. My Aunt Zara emerged as a genuine maternal figure who celebrated my achievements and supported my decisions without expecting anything in return. My cousin Jennifer became a close friend and confidant who understood both my professional success and my family struggles. Dr. Chen provided professional support that helped me process the complex emotions of grief, anger, and relief that accompanied my family's dissolution. My business continued to thrive during this period, partly because the resolution of my family drama allowed me to focus completely on my professional goals without the emotional drain of ongoing manipulation and conflict. Cloud Vault Technologies secured several major contracts and expanded into new international markets, increasing my net worth to over $40 million by the end of the year. More importantly, I began using my financial success to create positive change in ways that aligned with my values. I established a scholarship fund at my alma mater specifically for students from dysfunctional families who needed financial assistance to achieve independence through education. I also became a mentor for young entrepreneurs, particularly women, who were building businesses while managing difficult family dynamics. The scholarship fund was named after my grandmother, whose wisdom in structuring my inheritance had protected me from my family's manipulation. The fund's mission statement explicitly acknowledged the reality that some students need financial support to escape toxic family situations rather than to supplement family resources, and it provided comprehensive support including counseling services and legal assistance when needed. My dating life also improved significantly once I was free from the emotional baggage and stress of my family situation. I began a relationship with David Kim, a fellow entrepreneur who owned a sustainable technology company. David appreciated my independence and ambition, and he understood the complexities of building a business while maintaining personal relationships. Our relationship was built on mutual respect and shared values rather than financial dependence or emotional manipulation. The restraining order against Marcus remained in place, and I had no direct contact with him during his probation period. However, I learned through extended family members that he was slowly beginning to take responsibility for his actions and was working with financial counselors to develop better money management skills. While I felt no obligation to help him personally, I was glad to hear that he was finally confronting his problems rather than expecting others to solve them for him. The inheritance that had been the catalyst for our family's breakdown was finally distributed according to my grandmother's original intentions. I used a portion of the money to fund my scholarship program and donated another significant amount to organizations that supported victims of family financial abuse. The remaining funds were invested in a trust that would continue supporting these causes for years to come. Reflecting on the entire experience, I realized that my family's rejection had actually been a gift in disguise. It had forced me to confront the unhealthy dynamics that had shaped my entire life, and had given me the opportunity to build authentic relationships based on genuine care and respect. The pain of losing my biological family was real, but the freedom to live according to my own values was liberating. The most important lesson I learned was that justice and compassion are not mutually exclusive. Holding people accountable for their actions is actually a form of compassion both for their victims and for themselves because it provides opportunities for growth and change that enabling behavior never can. Have you ever had to choose between family loyalty and self-respect? What would you do if you discovered that the people closest to you valued your money more than your well-being? Share your thoughts in the comments below, because stories like mine happen more often than we want to admit. If this resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe for more real-life stories about family dynamics, financial independence, and choosing your own path. Share this with someone who might need to hear that they deserve better than conditional love based on what they can provide others. Thank you for listening to my story, and remember that sometimes the family you choose is stronger than the family you were born into. Until next time, keep building the life you deserve, not the life others expect from you.